Namaste. Welcome to this session. We have been considering with Sampragnyat Samadhi, and in the last session, we were trying to understand the terms Sampragnyat and Samadhi. Now, little more information about the word Sampragnyat. One of the highlights of the topic in the last session was that in Samadhi, it is becoming and not just knowing. It's not just knowledge of the kind that we are familiar with, whereby we end up with a condition that I know it, I know this, I know that, I am the knower, and that is the known. The unique thing is that in Samadhi it is transformation. The knowledge in the metaphysical realm of the nature of intuitive mysticism, and not just information or knowledge, is that there is becoming. The knowledge of all those principles, metaphysical principles, is by transformations. You need to become that to really have realization of that. If Samadhi is realization or revelation, it is by way of becoming. So, one thing is that it is always in the realm of metaphysics. You don't have to have Samadhi knowledge in the realm of knowables which are not metaphysical, but which are physical and below metaphysical, such as our objects of knowledge in the form of Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha, in the form of Manasik Vishayas, Bauddhik Vishayas, Bhavanik Vishayas. So there the empirical process, cerebral process is sufficient. But in the realm of metaphysics, where it is in the realm of nominal things, such as pancha mahabhutas onwards, pancha mahabhutas to Ishvara, Atma, Paramatma, the process there is by transformation, by becoming that. So yogi becomes that. That's why it is called sakshatkara. Samadhi sakshatkara. Now, what today I will be trying to convey is that in Sampragnyana, because Sampragnyata Samadhi gives the jnana of the caliber of Sampragnyana. Now we are familiar with knowledge in our times, modern science. We have notions of one-dimensional knowledge, two-dimensional, three-dimensional, and four-dimensional. So unidimensional, two-dimensional, when somebody has drawn a picture on a piece of paper, that is only two-dimensional. Say a figure of a person on a paper or on a canvas will be two-dimensional. Then we know there is something more realistic in three-dimensional. And then there is fourth dimension of the nature of time and space. So modern man is aware of this unidimensional, two-dimensional, three-dimensional, four-dimensional. And then they become more and more realistic. From unidimensional to four-dimensional, there is more realistic knowledge there. So, in case of this Samprajnana, what I want to tell you is that it is not just reality of the nature of three-dimensional vision three-dimensional perception or even four-dimensional perception. But as a matter of fact, not only multi-dimensional, but omnidimensional. What does it mean? What is omnidimensional? Jnana. Say, if you have sighted an object like rose, then for you, three-dimensional vision of it is realistic. Whatever kind of knowledge, even four-dimensional, when the time and space also has come in, then it becomes more and more realistic. That what is it that this knowledge doesn't circumscribe? It doesn't circumscribe a great deal about that object of knowledge. What is it? When you have seen a flower like a rose, you don't get the knowledge of its retrospective stages. Because before becoming that rose, which is now placed, which is on a plant or which is in a flower vase, you don't have retrospective part of that attached to your knowledge. So you do not know how the rose was, because the rose, before it blossomed into a flower as a rose, it was in a budded state. So from budded state, it bloomed and blossomed into being a flower. Now we don't include budded state in our knowledge there. We have no idea of the budded state of the flower. And before that, then what? So botanically we'll know how the flower comes on a tree, a rose plant. Then you will be logically able to understand that the rose flower, in its retrospective state, first it was just a plant. Because it appeared on the plant, the flower came on the plant. So plant is more earlier state. And earlier state to plant is sapling. Earlier state of plant is sapling state. Earlier state of sapling is the seed broken. Earlier state to seed broken is seed state. And earlier state to seed is that it is found in a plant. So we are caught in that cycle. We will not be able to go beyond. However, there are retrospectively different states for a flower like rose. Before the rose was there, or before the rose manifested as rose, it was in sand form, seed form, and then sand form, so many earlier forms. Then in metaphysics you are told about it. The physics will not tell you about it. In physics you will be caught in that cycle. Seed to plant, sapling to plant to flower to seed to sapling to plant to flower, seed, sapling, plant, flower. So we will be caught in this cycle. We will not be able to escape this cycle. But in metaphysics, we are not caught in this cycle. We go beyond this. So metaphysics will tell us that the rose had earlier phases in metaphysical realm. That means the rose has come from pancha mahabhutas, the quintuplicated 5 elements. The pancha mahabhutas come from the tanmatra, infraatomic structure. Tanmatra comes from ahankar. Ahankar comes from mahat. Mahat comes from pradhana. And there it ends. So retrospectively, it goes up to pradhana tattva. retrospectively, the rose will go back. If it is devolved, even in the plane of metaphysics, ultimately it will stop at pradhana tattva, which is called primordial matter, primeval matter. Now, see how much is excluded in our knowledge process, be that three-dimensional or four-dimensional or multi-dimensional. Yet this will not come in it, because this is in the realm of metaphysics. As I said, in the realm of physics, we will be caught in the circle and the cycle, and we will not be able to escape the cycle. The seed is root of all botanical manifestation. So seed to fruit, seed to flower, flower to seed, fruit to seed. So seed to flower and fruit to seed will be the cycle in physics, in physical realm. Whereas in metaphysical realm, that is, cycle is broken, and then we go beyond. So retrospectively, that rose was, in its earliest phase, pradhana tattva. What about prospectively? The rose is fresh now. When you are sighting it, it is fresh. But slowly it will be going towards decay. It will be slowly becoming a rotten flower. And then what will happen? That will ultimately become sand. The sand will ultimately become Prithvi Tattva. Prithvi Tattva will further will become Tanmatra. Tanmatra, then it will become Ahankara, and then Mahat, and again Pradhana. So the cycle is between Pradhana and Pradhana, retrospectively and prospectively. Now this is reality about the rose. Like we know that all this life, botanical life, will become sand. Say when if you sight the trees in the forests, nobody goes and does any conservation, and the trees fall after some centuries or after many decades, and they fall and remain like that for many years again, many decades again, but ultimately it's going to merge with the sand. So it is going to become ground. It not only falls on the ground, but it becomes ground matter. Maybe it will take some centuries, or at least some decades, many decades. But that's what happens to trees in forest. So, retrospectively, a rose devolves up to being pradhana. And prospectively, the rose evolves in becoming pradhana. So, the cycle is between pradhana and pradhana. This is the reality about rose. Now see how much is excluded in our thorough knowledge, complete knowledge, scientific knowledge. All these things don't come in there. While in Samadhi realization, the rose will be taken back to Pradhana on one hand and will be evolved again to Pradhana on the other hand. That is why it is omni-dimensional, that or complete dimensional. There is no dimension is excluded. All dimensional. It is in one sense all dimensional. Jnana, if it is jnana. So that is how you will see the difference between Samadhi Pragnya. In Samadhi process, the knowledge extends to, in a retrospective realm, to primordial matter, and in prospective realm again to primordial matter. Because this rose prospectively is going to become rose seed, and then it will again going to come as a rose. So rose to rose seed to rose to rose seed, rose to rose seed. This is how it is going to rotate in physical realm. But somewhere there will be deluge. At the end of this creation cycle, there will be deluge. Then what will happen? So if you recall, I said that there would be night time of kalpa, deluge kind of condition of the kalpa, which will extend to 4,320 million years. So for 4,320 million years, the rose will never appear as rose. It will have to wait for next cycle to be getting launched. And then the creation will come up, and when the creation comes up, somewhere the botanical life will come up, and when botanical life will come up, the rose plant will come up, and when the rose plants come up, plant will come up, the rose will come up. But for 4,320 million years, it will be in noumenal state. Unlike we see now today, the flower becomes sand. It goes into sand, and again the rose plant comes up, and again you have the rose. So, understand the dimension that Samadhi Prajna has. How much the Samadhi process includes the knowledge. So, this was another thing that I wanted to convey to you. With respect to dimensions, unidimensional, two-dimensional knowledge, or two-dimensional reality, three-dimensional reality, four-dimensional reality, multi-dimensional reality, to all-dimensional reality. That is why it is samyak. Samyak prajnayate iti sampragnyat. Sampragnyataha. So, that was one more thing that I wanted to convey. Now, the other thing we considered in the last session was the Samadhi process, that it starts from gross pranayam, then subtle pranayam, then the Omkar incorporated into pranayam, what is popularly known as Soham sadhana in spiritual practices. So the Soham sadhana, that means the Om comes there. And then like dream objects appear in the minds of we mortals, the Samadhi object appears out of omified mind. So having gone through pratyahara, now there is no concentration. So this should be totally now discarded from our notion and idea that dharana is concentration, because concentration is always on sensory objects, in sensory processes. Now when there are no sensory objects on account of pratyahara, there is nothing like concentration in yoga. So once and for all, we must do away with this idea and notion that dharana is concentration. Because there is pratyahara. If there is pratyahara, the senses are abstracted. If the senses are abstracted, they are not engaged, or they cannot get engaged with their objects. If they are not able to get engaged with the sensory objects, there can be no chance of any concentration. So then I told you that pranayam, pratyahara, then comes dharana in a continuous process without any interruption. So confinement is dharana. The chitta gets confined to that object. Like our minds are always confined to dream objects. We don't lack confinement while we are having a dream. There's a complete confinement of the mind in our dream experience with the dream object. As I said last time, that there is no distraction, digression of our mind while we are seeing a dream. But in a wakeful state, if you are seeing something, there will be digression and it is prone to digressions. But in Swapnavastha, that is not at all prone to digression. So that also we considered last time, that how pranayam, sthula to sukshma to onkara yukta to pratyahar to dharana and then dhyana, pratyayekatanata. The object in the mind is always a flowing river. Like a movie film, in movie film there is always an arriving frame and departing frame. From in front of the light and behind the lens. So if you remember that process of seeing a movie film on a screen in a dark room, so the film passes through from one spool to another spool between the lens and light, and that's why we get the movie effect. Now when the movie has shot a still figure for say 5 minutes, then we get the still effect on the screen for 5 minutes, but the film is not still. The film is moving from one spool to another spool, and there is always arriving frame and departing frame, arriving frame and departing frame, but all frames are having identical depiction, reflection or content. Therefore we get the still effect on the screen. That is pratyayekatanata process. The mind is running, but the content of arriving mind and departing mind will be ditto, identical, ditto, same with no variation. As if a still has been shot in a movie film. Our mind is like a movie film, it doesn't stop. So that is pratyayekatanata, and then in Samadhi, we also consider that characteristic swarupa-shunyam iva and arthamatra nirbhasa, object only and no individual identity therein. So there is never a condition that I had Samadhi, I am in Samadhi, I had Samadhi, because I is not there in Samadhi process. So now let's understand one more meaning of the word Sampragnyat in Sampragnyat Samadhi, which Patanjali has defined in his sutra. In the sutra he says there are 4 kinds of Sampragnyat Samadhi: Vitarka-anugata, Vichara-anugata, Ananda-anugata, Asmita-anugata. Anugata is a suffix. What is this anugata? We have to understand the word anugata. What is anugata? We have to understand the word anugata with the word or the verb anugamanam. What is anugamanam? See, we are walking with our a friend on a street. So maybe the friend is side by side. So the friend is accompanying. He is side by side. But it's also possible because of crowded roads, sometimes the friend is right behind you. Few paces behind you, a pace or 2 behind you. And then, or he is following you. He is couple of paces behind and then he is following you to be with you, to be coming with you. He cannot be rubbing shoulders with you on crowded streets and pavements. So he has to be little behind you and he follows you. So that is called also kind of anugamanam, because he follows you. Both have decided to go together to a destination. So it's not that you will be rubbing the shoulders throughout to reach the destination. Sometimes someone will be lagging behind, that person will be behind you, or you might be behind that person, etc. It happens. So That is one meaning of following, accompanying and following. Accompanying means will be with you, will be side by side with you. So if there is a room for the friend to walk with you, parallel to you and along with you, shoulder to shoulder with you, then that is accompanying, accompaniment. But then little behind means follow. So anugamanam means to follow. There is another meaning to anugamanam in saying that follow. Somebody is following you. When somebody is following you means he is coming behind you. Okay. What is the another meaning? Somebody can be following you under your hypnotic spell. If you have kept that person under your hypnotic spell, still the person will follow you. Wherever you go, the person will follow you. So that's called hypnotic spell. In hypnosis, the magicians cast a spell, a hypnotic spell on another person. And then tell that person to laugh, the person laughs. Tells that person to cry, the person cries. Tells that person to crawl, the person crawls. Tell that person to jump, the person jumps. So this is what happens in hypnotic spell. What is the condition under hypnotic spell? That person doesn't have identity. Under the spell, the person loses the identity. It is not that he is in a mimicry, or he is not just following your suggestions. He is under a spell and follows your instructions, suggestions under a spell. And under a spell means has lost identity. So Sampragnyat is defined as anugamat with a wonderful predicate to a verb called anugamat. So the chitta is doing anugamanam to vitarka support, vichara support, ananda support, asmita support. So there is always a support in samadhi. Sampragnyat samadhi, there is always a support. So the supports are of those categories. We will see about those supports later. But there are 4 categories called vitarka, vichara, ananda, asmita. So when yogi is under a spell of vitarka, like hypnotic spell, because by being under hypnotic spell, he loses his identity, swarupa shunyam. And then under spell of metaphysical principles, he becomes the metaphysical principles. That we saw, that there is a becoming. So it is under a spell. The yogi's chitta is under a spell of the support of samadhi, which can be vitarka samadhi or vitarka support or vichara support or ananda support or asmita support. Whatever is the support, the yogi's chitta goes under the spell of it. And that is why it is anugamat, anugamanam. So in Sampragnyat Samadhi, there is this spell, like hypnotic spell that we understand, there is a spell, and under a spell, the chitta is going after vitarka support or vichara support or ananda support or asmita support, and then under that spell there is becoming. In hypnotic spell, there is no becoming of one under the spell and one casting a spell. The person doesn't become magician, but he is under the spell of magician. But here there is that becoming. So Sampragnyata is anugamanam, according to Patanjali, his description, his definition. So this is another factor that we were supposed to take note of, that Samadhi is always a spell. And this is a spell different than trance. In trance, you don't really become. You are you, and then you are under a spell. Like in hypnotic spell, you are you, but you are under a spell. You are you, but you don't have your identity on surface. You don't feel your identity, but you are under a spell. So imagine somebody has cast a hypnotic spell on you, and then you are under the suggestions of the magician. So he goes on suggesting, you crawl, you start crawling. You cry, you start crying. You laugh, you start laughing. You jump, you start jumping. You run, you start running. You sit there. Now this is under a spell. It is not just taking suggestions cerebrally, but there is a spell. So in Sampragnyat Samadhi, the metaphysical supports cast a spell on yogi's chitta, and yogi's chitta becomes that. It is not only caught in the spell of it, but there is becoming. That's how, if you recall, I said in Samadhi there is becoming, there is transformation. In the last session we were discussing this. So this is by coming under the spell. That is how the becoming is there. So today I cited a couple of things more than what we cited last time, that in Sampragnyat Samadhi there is becoming. This was our vague statement in earlier sessions. So today I told you what is becoming and how is that becoming, whereby there is Swarupa Shunya state and Arthamatra Nirbhasa. The whole thing becomes that. So one more mysterious thing about yoga is that in Samadhi spell, the knower, knowing, known is all you. You are the knower, you are the known, you are the knowing. Now in case the Samadhi is on, say, lotus, you are lotus. You know lotus. The knowing is lotus. The knowable is lotus. Knower is lotus. Knowledge is lotus. That is why it is a grade of knowledge that we have in Samadhi. Knower, knowing, known, knowledge is all pertaining to one entity. It is not that I know, I am so and so, I know a lotus in empirical perception. I don't become lotus in empirical perception. I only know the lotus. Then there is a knowing instrumentality of mind, intelligence, psyche, consciousness, senses. These are the media through which I get my knowledge. So the knower is intact. No known object, the lotus in example, is also intact. The knowing, the instrumentation is also intact, and the knowledge is also intact. So I, the subjective entity, is a knower, and what is known is lotus. How is the knowing? Through mind, intelligence, senses, psyche, consciousness, and process of brain. And what is the knowledge? Knowledge is lotus. So there is a difference between object lotus and knowledge lotus. There is no mix-up between object lotus and knowledge lotus. Because when I say I know lotus, I don't become lotus. I am not lotus myself, but I know lotus. So the quadrate of prama, prameya, pramana, pramatru. If you recall, during epistemology, we dealt with it. Prama, prameya, pramana, pramatru. They are all maintaining their identities. As entities, they do exist separately, and then we have our knowledge. So in our knowledge, we never become the objects. When we know an object like lotus or rose or elephant, we don't become that. We don't have to become that. We never become that. And then we have knowledge. While in Samadhi, it is all you are knower. You are knower as lotus, having become lotus in Samadhi. You are lotus and you know lotus. The knowing is through lotus, because all the instruments have been lotusized, if I may say so. Such is the spell of object of Samadhi. So the instruments are lotusized. Knower is lotusized. Knowledge is lotusized. Known is lotus itself. So, in Samadhi, one knows oneself, by oneself, through oneself, with reference to oneself, with the media of oneself. So, knower, knowing, known are all oneself in yoga, in Samadhi. So, again, this is another mysterious aspect of Sampragnyat Samadhi. So, I think with that, this was quite heavy matter. So, let's conclude the session in understanding the Sampragnyata Samadhi, the Sampragnyat and Samadhi aspects in another dimension of it. So, with that, we end the lesson today. Namaskar, all of you.